Hi, I'm Barry Gilreath, host of Fabric of Family. I want to thank you for joining us today. Today in our discussion panel, we're going to talk about something that potentially has an effect upon every single person that's watching today. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment to begin our program.
How do you explain? How do you describe?
In Him, all families are blessed. Join our discussion on Fabric of Family.
I once heard of a reporter who had the opportunity to interview a woman who was 104 years old. The reporter asked the question. The question was, and what do you think is the best thing about being 104? Well, what do you think that someone who's lived that long might say? Well, this lady astutely responded, no peer pressure. Well, maybe that's true if you live to be 104 years old. At 104, you've probably outlived most of your peers. But for most of us, peer pressure is something that we face on a daily basis. Especially is this true for our children. Because of their age and because of this strong desire to be accepted among a peer group, some children have a really hard time going against the direction of their peers. And so in our program today, we're going to talk with a couple of guests about peer pressure and how that we as parents can best help our children to deal with this strong influence. But before we do that, let's watch this next segment by a young man by the name of Harrison Chastain as he talks to young people about making wise decisions. Harrison?
One amazing statistic is the fact that we are losing 75% of our young people to the world when they begin college. That's about 3 out of every 4. Why is that? Why are we losing so many of our young people to the world in this society today? One reason is because young people choose when they begin college to cut off their relationship with God. They don't see a point in having a relationship with God, and they quit going to church altogether, they quit practicing religion, and they live their lives unfaithful to God, and that's their choice. But another reason I believe that we are losing so many of our young people to the world is because they don't choose colleges. We don't choose colleges, young people, that put God first. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. What I'm not saying is that if you do not go to a Christian college that you're wrong. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that when we choose a college, young people, we need to choose a college where somewhere on that campus God is put first and He is made a priority. A lot of schools have campuses where they have a Christian student center, where they have mission groups, they have outreach groups, and that's all fine and good. But it's up to us ultimately, young people, to expose ourselves to that, to go to the Christian student center, to go to the missions group, to go to the outreach group, to do community service projects. God is the true source of wisdom and knowledge. We read in His Word, Solomon would write in the book of Proverbs 1 and verse 7, he says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So young people, if we want to gain true knowledge, we have to first of all start by fearing God. And the last part of that verse says, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. In other words, the unintelligent person despises wisdom. And wisdom, young people, is different from knowledge. Wisdom does not come to us from a chemistry textbook. It doesn't come from a pre-calculus textbook. It doesn't come from the mouth of some professor. But true wisdom comes from the Word of God. James chapter 1 and verse 5, James would write there, he says that if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach. Yes, young people, knowledge can be found in a textbook, but true wisdom can be found in God. So when we go to college, young people, let us never depart from the source of all wisdom, which is Almighty God. Let us strive to make a college choice that's good for us, but also that would strengthen our relationship with God. And let us consult Him in His Word. Let us consult Him in prayer as we seek the wisdom, not the knowledge, but the wisdom to make a college choice that would be pleasing to Him.
It is time to begin our panel discussion. I have with me Corey Barnett, who's been with us in previous programming. Corey is the preacher for the Fairview Church of Christ in Pulaski, Tennessee. And sitting beside Corey is another guest today, Tom Hodge. Tom's been with us before and always does a wonderful job as well. Tom preaches for the Second Creek Church of Christ in Savannah, Tennessee. Gentlemen, we're talking about peer pressure today, and specifically within the context of children. Though we know peer pressure is something that affects all people of all ages, our children are especially vulnerable to it. Why do you think children are especially sensitive to peer pressure?
I heard something recently delivered by a football coach. He was a coach for 20 plus years, very successful, who then became a preacher. And he was talking about now, not necessarily young children, but if we talk about teenagers a little bit as well. He said he found that for young men, let's say young boys, teenagers, that three things the world looks at for value: athletic ability, sexual prowess, and material wealth. He said those three things are pushed not just by our culture, but by the friends of these young men. And he said a lot of young men are saying, if I can't excel in those areas, then I'm a failure. And so that pressure, they try to compete in those three things, where the value of that young man, young woman, child, is based on the fact that, of course, they're made in God's image. And we need to believe that first, and we need to show them, the young people, that's true as well.
I also think some of it has to do with the fact that young folks want to fit in so badly. They want to find a niche in life somewhere, and they want to be accepted so badly that they're willing to give in and compromise at times their principles because of the fact of those things. They want to fit in and they want to have that niche somewhere.
Yeah. Well, if you were going to study this subject from a biblical perspective, you get out a concordance and you look up the word peer pressure, and how many times do you find that found in the Bible?
Not going to find it.
Yeah, you don't find it. So, I mean, does that mean it's not a biblical subject?
Oh no, there's one in particular that comes to my mind very quickly, and that was when Solomon became the king, and he had to start learning how to deal with the people at that moment in time, and he wanted advice. He wanted to figure out how to do it, and he went and he got advice from the older individuals. He got advice from the younger individuals. And instead of listening to the wiser and older individuals of his time and how that could have helped him be a better king at that moment, he listened to the younger ones, and things didn't turn out as well. And I think to a degree that was a sign of peer pressure. He was listening to those who were his peers instead of those who had more wisdom and more experience. And unfortunately, just like it happens many times today, the peer pressure didn't help him there.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a biblical subject. Some things are addressed in the Bible, specifically. Other things are addressed through principle. And what we're talking about today is certainly addressed many times in principle. I think about Jesus, Tom, when he went out and was tempted by the devil, and there was pressure there put upon him to do things that he knew he shouldn't do. So, there are many examples in the Scripture of peer pressure and it have an effect upon people as they were going about living their life. Why do you think that as a parent it's important not only to teach our children what not to do, but how to deal with these situations?
I know a fellow who has two sons, just a few years apart, but their personalities are very different. He told me, he said the older boy is a leader. A lot of times older kids are leaders, naturally. The younger son, he said, is a follower. And I noticed in the time that I knew them, the younger son got into trouble many times. And the reason was he did some very strange things because his friends are doing that. Now, the older boy did not give in to that temptation. So we all have different personalities, and of course that's no excuse for behavior, but that father realized I've got to key in on the strengths and weaknesses of both of these young men. And sometimes you have to do different things with different children to help them because they're looking at things a little differently than their brother or sister might be, for instance.
And also, if all you ever deal is with the negative and tell them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, the time's going to come eventually where they're going to want to branch out a little bit. And they're going to think, well, it's just because mom and dad told me not to. If you explain to them the consequences of it, or you show them the better side of what it can be if you don't do it, the pressure there is not going to be as strong, because they understand that it's not just mom and dad telling me no. It's not just them saying I can't. Here's a reason for it. This is the consequence of my actions, and here's the better result that could be if I don't give in at this moment in time.
Yeah, and not even ending there. I think it's important that we as parents do a little coaching with our children. Maybe talk to them about real life scenarios. They're out at the mall or whatever, and they run into a friend, and the friend's trying to get them to, try this cigarette or drink this substance or whatever it is. Does the child know that it's wrong to do that? Well, if we've taught them, like what we've been talking about, yeah, they know. But, it's good, I think, for parents to kind of sit down with their kids and say, now, okay, what if this were to occur? How might you respond? To kind of help lead them along through the process of, when they're tempted to do these things. What are your thoughts about that?
It's sad, I guess, that we don't do that more. I think a lot of times as parents, we think, well, that's, why would we do that? Or we don't think about the specific, like you said, but we do specific instruction for their kids with everything else.
Yeah.
Their homework at school, things that are expected, sports. We go over the fine details of what to do.
Yeah.
I think they would be surprised at first when we did it, but as they got used to it, I think they'd look forward to it, because they're wanting to know. I think our kids, they want to do what's right, and so they're needing some specific direction sometimes. I think that's a great idea.
And I guess I asked the question because of this very, very point that you were making, that we teach them how to do things in other areas of life. For example, you get a young child and you want to teach them how to tie their shoes. Do you just simply sit down and say, okay, to tie your shoes, you grab each string in either hand, and you tie a knot, and then you do a bow? Or do we actually get down and help them tie the shoe and let them see the process, let them have some hands-on experience? We understand that's important in something as simple as tying your shoes. They need also this coaching, going through these various scenarios regarding these temptations that they're going to face, so that they can have some practice, if you will, in a safe environment of how to handle a situation in which I am being pressured to do something that I know is wrong, but how do I handle it in an effective way to where I come out and am not scathed by the temptation and giving into it?
If parents were honest with themselves as adults, they don't know sometimes how they're going to react in certain situations until they go through it. They may have all the knowledge in the world, but until that opportunity presents itself to put it into practice, they don't even know. Yeah. So when we get to that point with our children, we shouldn't expect them to be any different. We need to do that type of coaching, as you called it, because, again, until they're put in that position and we go through it, and again, the old 3 R's of learning, repetition, 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 until they understand the process and what it's like when you go through it, when it first springs up on them, they may know every answer to everything in the world, but how are they going to react to it?
Yeah, they need to learn how to react to it. That's what I want us to talk about when we come back in just a moment. I want us to talk about maybe some helpful tips that kids need to know about peer pressure, and maybe some steps that parents can take to help their children deal more effectively with it. But we're going to watch another segment at this point in time. We have a family faith builder with Kyle Budd of Apologetics Press. So let's watch this segment, then we'll be back to continue our discussion.
God of our fathers praised, and the God of our fathers praised.
Not long ago, I was in Arkansas doing a series of lessons, and I was talking about the existence of God and creation and how things fit perfectly scientifically with what the Bible says. And a young man came up to me after the lesson, and he said, "Yeah, I hear what you're saying about all that science stuff, but you got to admit the Bible is full of contradictions." And I said, "No, I don't have to admit that." I said, "Can you give me an example of one?" He said, oh, the Bible's full of them. And he opened this folder, and there was a page in the folder that was covered from the top to the bottom, and it looked like it was about 3.2 font. I could hardly even see it. And he said, look at all these. And I think there were a list of something like a supposed 1,000 alleged contradictions in the Bible. He said, look, the Bible is filled with them. And then he closed it so fast I could hardly even read one of them. And I said, hold on just a second. I said, I didn't even have time to read a single one of those. I said, can you show me one of those that is a legitimate contradiction? And I think he responded with something like, well, I haven't really looked at any one of them too closely, but there are just so many. You know, lots of times that's how alleged Bible contradictions are presented to the Bible believer. Hey, there are so many contradictions in the Bible, you should just be blown away by the sheer number of them. But the fact of the matter is, when you ask for one legitimate contradiction, one that can be proven to be a contradiction, what you find is that there's not one. Now let me give you an example of one that the skeptic community often throws into the face of the Bible believer. Lots of times the skeptics will say, well, what about the resurrection accounts? You know, if you go over to the book of Mark, chapter 16, verse 1, you will see that the text says that Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome came to the tomb. But then if you go to Matthew and you look in chapter 28 of Matthew, it just says that Mary and the other Mary came to the tomb. So which is it? Is it Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, or just Mary Magdalene and the other Mary? You see, the skeptic says that's a contradiction. No, it's not. Just because one text has two names and another text has three, that's not a contradiction. It's a difference, but it's certainly not a contradiction. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. Suppose my wife and I went to the mall, and one of our friends was talking to us later about where we had been. And I said, we went to the mall, and we went to the hunting store, we went to Cinnabon, and then we walked by the video game store. And those were the three stores that I mentioned. And they asked my wife, and my wife, who wasn't with me in that conversation talking to the friend, they asked her, and she said, oh, we went to Gap, and then we sat down in the food court, and we ate some Chick-fil-A, and then we went over to Belk, and then we went to JCPenney. Now, have my wife and I contradicted each other? No, you see, what that's called is supplementation. When one person adds information that is not contradictory, then you have supplementation. Is it true that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb? Yes. Is it true that Salome also went to the tomb? Yes, that's true as well. Why would God have texts that differ like that but are not contradictory? You know what the skeptic is forced to say. When he runs into something that is different, he has to say these texts, these books, these authors didn't copy one another. You see, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 witnesses to the resurrection and they have different facts, but those facts are not contradictory, they're supplementary, well then what you have is proof that there were multiple witnesses to the resurrection. And when you can show that supplementation is not contradiction, then you have proven that there are no contradictions in the resurrection accounts. And subsequently, if we had time, we could prove that there are no contradictions in the entirety of the Bible. You see, the Bible was written by God, and God, knowing everything, put together books that prove Jesus Christ rose from the dead, that Jesus did miracles, that those Bible writers were working for and speaking for God. There aren't contradictions in the Bible. And we can show that with this example of supplementation. I'm Kyle Butt, and this has been a Family Faith Builder. Thank you for being with us.
Well, we're back talking about peer pressure, specifically as it relates to our children and helping our children learn to deal with something that's very influential in their lives. Corey Barnett and Tom Hodge are back to discuss this with me and want us to think about some things that really kids need to know about peer pressure. We talked about coaching and the importance of that, but there's some facts, some things they need to know as well. For example, I think it's good that kids know that there are some young people that you need to stay away from, because these are the kind of young people who are going to pressure you to do wrong things or do dangerous things. I think that's certainly one thing they need to be aware of. What else? What could we add to that list?
I think about the book of Proverbs, for instance. We're looking at specific help for our kids. And when you think about it, Solomon in Proverbs had some very specific directions to a young man specifically, but others, about situations that would come up in his life. And when certain people presented temptation, he said, this is what you should do. This is what you should not do. My late father-in-law, he told me that his father, who was a Christian, read to him from the book of Proverbs and apparently explained it as he went as a young boy. Later, when he was in military service, away from his family, he faced some of those very temptations. And he told me every day when that happened, he thought back to his dad reading Proverbs and explaining, this is what I don't need to do or need to do, even as a grown person. So, boy, the Word is powerful. It stays with us, specific directions about what to do.
Excellent point. Corey?
Well, you see a situation like that where the people that you associate, of course, we can think very quickly, evil communications corrupt good manners. And you think about how the influence of those individuals around you are going to affect your behavior.
Yes.
That's just one aspect of it, but if you teach your young folks in particular on the front end to make friends who are not going to put you in positions like that, but are going to assist you to get out of them, that's going to make a big difference in their lives. I mean, I want my young daughter to have friends who are not going to put her in those positions, but are going to try to help her stay away from those positions.
And Corey, I think that is an excellent point that you have brought out, because we oftentimes associate peer pressure with that which is bad, because of what it can lead us into. But there's also a positive aspect of it. And if our kids, our children, associate with other kids who have common values, who believe in God, who are trying to live right and do right, guess what? They're going to be pressured in a good way. They're going to be encouraged in a good way to do what's right. So that's an excellent point. What about encouraging our children to talk with someone when they feel like they're being pressured by someone to do something they shouldn't?
I don't know about you, Tom, but to me, growing up, I had a very close friend that I could confide in with just about anything at any time. I would look back at it, I would have liked to have felt I had more confidence in being able to go to my parents, even though they were there for me, they loved me, they cared for me. I just would have liked to have felt more comfortable feeling like that I could have done that. I want, if I can, as a parent, and to help the children who even aren't mine, the ones at Fairview who are my friends and I'm seeing them grow, I want them to feel like they can come to me at any moment, at any time, with any situation, and they're going to have someone who sincerely cares about them and is going to try to, as best as I can, to show them that whatever's going on in their life is important to me. And if they see it's important to me, I think that it's going to make a difference. They'll feel more comfortable next time coming to me. And I'm not going to be able to give them the perfect advice all the time, but they're going to see that there's somebody out there that is willing to listen and talk.
I was blessed to have Christian parents, and my mother, I could go to her with everything and anything, things that I'd done wrong that I wouldn't tell anybody else about, and she was always very helpful in that. As a younger child, I had some friends. They weren't bad guys, but they weren't the best. And I realized, and I got into some things with them that weren't really good. Thankfully, like you just said, though, as a teenager, I found and got close to some folks that were very strong. And they helped me, and that changed. I'm glad I made that change in friendship to stronger Christian young people. That made a big difference in my life. And so if it works with us, it'll work with our kids.
Yeah, and both of you have emphasized the importance of a young person who's feeling pressure to do something that they know they shouldn't do, to talk with somebody, to talk to someone, maybe a parent, if they feel that they can do that, or if not a parent, a teacher, or a Christian at church, but to talk to someone who can give them some encouragement and guidance to help them through what can be a very difficult time in their life. Well, let's think about self-esteem for just a moment, because I think anytime you talk about peer pressure, the topic of self-esteem also filters into that discussion, because children with low self-esteem tend to be children who are more influenced by the pressure they receive from peers.
Guilty as charged. That's the way I was as a child. I'll admit it on television, and to those who can hear me, I know that feeling personally. When you feel like you want so badly to have people like you, to have you fit in with them, to have friends with them, and you're willing to compromise and do what you know may not be the right thing just so you can have that relationship. And self-esteem is a huge factor. We need to instill in our young folks very early, as best as we can, in the family or outside the family, whatever the case may be, that as long as they are doing what they know is right, regardless of what everybody else thinks about them, they have no reason to be ashamed. I think about the apostles in the first century and the pressure they had to quit preaching Christ. I mean, their peers wanted them to absolutely be quiet and no longer go out and do it, and yet they weren't alone. They had each other. And they had people encouraging them along the way to keep doing what was right, and how that showed them, look, there may be people out there who look down upon you, but you can do this. And I know from experience, if you have a low self-esteem problem, you're more susceptible to this.
Well, we got about 30 seconds left. Tom, you want to follow up with anything?
You know, God helps us to have the courage to be a nonconformist in a good way. You know, Paul said, be transformed, not conformed by the renewing of your mind. And that happens every day, and it starts in the family, and it works with our children as well.
Well, I'll tell you, this is an important subject, and I know parents are watching the program today, and they understand how peer pressure can have an effect upon their kids. Thank you for being with us, and hopefully we'll get together and talk about this on another occasion. Well, that's all the time that we have for Fabric of Family today. And I, again, want to thank you for watching the program, not only today, but for those of you who watch it on a regular basis. We very much appreciate your support. We would invite you to visit with a Church of Christ in your area, and there are a number of congregations and individual Christians who are involved in producing and supporting this particular program. Some of these congregations are going to be listed on the screen in just a moment, and I know they would love to have you to visit with them at your first opportunity. We would love to have you to come and visit with us at the Jackson Heights Church of Christ in Florence, Alabama. That is the host congregation for Fabric of Family. It's also the congregation for which I preach. If you would have interest in a home Bible correspondence course, we have that available and would be happy to send that out to you. All you need to do is contact us. You can contact us through snail mail, email, or just call us. We'll get it out to you. There's absolutely no cost for it, and we would just be delighted to offer that to you. We have a great program lined up for next time, so we hope you'll be back with us again. And we would encourage you to call your friends and family and let them know about this program so that they can benefit from Fabric of Family. I'm Barry Gilreath Jr., wishing you and your family a wonderful week. Have a great day.